He was one of the richest men in the city, powerful, respected, untouchable. But when a sudden illness struck, his wealth couldn't protect him. Surrounded by 15 of the nation's best doctors, every second felt like a battle for his life. And yet, as monitors beeped and panic filled the hospital, nothing worked. The man who had everything was slipping away, right before their eyes. But then, someone the world would never expect stepped forward. Not a doctor, not a nurse, not a man of power. A young boy, the son of a janitor. A boy who carried both the brilliance of a mind far beyond his years, and the heavy weight of being judged for the color of his skin. What he saw that day shocked everyone in the room. A truth so clear, yet ignored. A moment that exposed not just a medical failure, but a deeper injustice that money and status couldn't erase. And the question remains, how could so many experts miss what one black child saw in an instant? It began like any other day. The billionaire's name carried weight across the city, towering buildings bore his investments, politicians sought his approval, and headlines often praised his influence. To the world, he seemed invincible. His life was built on deals, power, and the certainty that no obstacle was too great for his wealth to overcome. But far away from the corner office and glittering banquets, another life unfolded quietly in the same city. A janitor, invisible to most who passed him, pushed his cart down long hospital hallways. His uniform smelled faintly of cleaning supplies, his hands worn from years of labor. Few noticed him, fewer still remembered his name. Yet at his side was his son, a boy with bright, curious eyes who often waited for his father to finish his shift. Books tucked under his arm, questions spilling from his mind, he was a child both gifted and restless, carrying dreams far larger than the world allowed him to hold. Every evening, as the boy watched doctors rush past without so much as a glance, he learned something important, that brilliance doesn't always wear a white coat, and that dignity isn't always recognized. What neither father nor son could know was that fate was preparing to draw them into the life of the billionaire, the man who seemed untouchable. A meeting of worlds so far apart, it would reveal truths that could not be ignored. Because when the night came that 15 doctors stood helpless, it was not money, power, or status that mattered. It was the sharp, unblinking eyes of a child who had always been overlooked. The first signs of trouble appeared quietly, almost invisible to most. The billionaire had arrived at the hospital in a rush, his body weakened, his breath shallow. He was wheeled past lines of patients, straight to a private room guarded by glass walls and hushed urgency. The best doctors were summoned, 15 of them, specialists from every field, flown in within hours. The room filled with authority, with confidence, with the weight of medicine's brightest minds. Yet as the hours passed, something became clear, their treatments weren't working. Machines hummed, charts piled up, and whispers turned sharp with worry. The man who had ruled over boardrooms and city skylines was slipping further away. But no one dared say it out loud. The janitor's son sat quietly in the corner of the waiting area, pretending to read. His father had been asked to stay late, cleaning the very halls where history was being written. The boy watched as nurses hurried past, as white coats filled the air with technical words he didn't fully understand, but he noticed things others ignored. The billionaire's skin tone, the strange rhythm of his breathing, the subtle signs that didn't match the doctor's confident pronouncements. Still, nobody looked his way. Nobody asked him what he thought. After all, who would listen to a black child whose father scrubbed floors? The tension deepened. Inside the glass room, the doctors tried one treatment, then another. Each failure sharpened their frustration. The billionaire's family demanded answers, their voices tight with fear and disbelief. How can this be happening? You're the best, do something. But the doctor's silence spoke louder than their words. And all the while, the boy's heart pounded. He could see what was wrong. Not clearly, not completely, but enough to feel the dread pressing against his chest. He tugged at his father's sleeve, whispering his concern. The janitor shook his head. Not now, son. This isn't our place. But the boy couldn't shake it. Each second was agony, watching men of power miss what seemed so obvious. Watching his father's silence, heavy with years of knowing that speaking up in the wrong room, with the wrong skin, could cost more than a job. Hours stretched. The doctors argued among themselves, their authority cracking under the weight of failure. Yet none of them noticed the boy's gaze, fixed, unflinching, certain. Then came the moment that changed everything. The monitors spiked. Nurses rushed in. The billionaire's chest heaved as alarms filled the room. Panic erupted. Orders shouted, hands moving in frantic rhythm, but nothing worked. And through the chaos, the boy rose from his chair. His voice, small but firm, cut through the noise. "You're looking in the wrong place." Heads turned. For a moment, silence. Then scoffs, dismissals, the kind of laughter reserved for those considered unworthy. "Sit down, kid. This is no place for you." But the boy didn't sit. His hands shook, his throat tight, yet he pressed on. He pointed out what he had seen, the detail everyone ignored. His words were sharp with urgency, trembling with the weight of being unheard too many times. The room froze. The doctors hesitated, not because they believed him, but because desperation leaves no stone unturned. Reluctantly, one of them checked. Then another. And suddenly, their faces shifted. Shock. Recognition. The boy was right. But instead of gratitude, anger followed. How could they have missed it? How could a janitor's son see what 15 doctors did not? Pride burned hotter than truth. Some refused to admit it. Some questioned the boy's presence. And in that moment, the hospital walls revealed more than a medical crisis, they revealed a wound far deeper. Because it wasn't just an illness that threatened a man's life that night. It was arrogance, blindness, and a system where a black child's voice was worth less than the silence of failure. And as the billionaire's life hung in the balance, the question grew louder, unavoidable, piercing. Would they act on the truth spoken by a boy they were taught to ignore, or would pride and prejudice let a man die? The room trembled with tension. Machines beeped, alarms screamed, and doctors' voices overlapped in frantic confusion. The billionaire's body convulsed under the weight of failing treatments, his skin pale, his breath shallow. The very air felt heavy, thick with panic, fear, and disbelief. 15 doctors stood in a circle, armed with years of training and degrees framed in gold, yet every second proved their helplessness. And then, there was the boy. Small in stature, but unshaken in his resolve. His words hung in the air, a single truth cutting through layers of denial: "You're looking in the wrong place." The reaction was swift. One doctor turned sharply, his face hard. Another shook his head in disbelief. Some scoffed openly. How could a child, a janitor's black son, dare to question them? Pride seethed beneath their lab coats. Yet behind the arrogance was something darker, a refusal to believe that brilliance could come from someone society had decided was invisible. The janitor, standing at the back, pulled his son close. "Please," he whispered, his voice trembling with fear. "Don't say another word." He knew what defiance could cost. Years of quiet endurance had taught him that survival often meant silence. But the boy couldn't stop. His chest tightened with urgency, his mind racing with images of what he had seen, what he knew. The billionaire didn't have time for pride. He spoke again, louder this time, his voice breaking. He pointed to the signs, the overlooked symptom, the subtle clue that didn't fit the doctor's assumptions. His words tumbled out in a rush, raw and desperate. For a moment, the room froze. Eyes darted from the child to the patient, then to the monitors. Doubt flickered across their faces, but pride fought back harder. One of the doctors snapped, "We don't take advice from children. Especially not from," he stopped himself, but the unspoken word lingered, heavy, poisonous. The boy felt it. The sting of being dismissed not because he was wrong, but because of who he was. His father lowered his head, shame and rage mixing in his chest. The silence of years pressed down on him. He wanted to protect his son, but he also knew this moment wasn't his to control. Then it happened. The billionaire's vitals plummeted. Nurses screamed. The room erupted into chaos. The doctors scrambled, their carefully rehearsed procedures unraveling into desperation. And through it all, the boy's voice cut through again. "If you don't listen now, he's going to die." The words were sharp, unyielding, impossible to ignore. A nurse, trembling, looked at the boy, then at the monitors. She hesitated, then acted. She followed his suggestion, almost secretly, as if ashamed to consider it. Seconds later, the monitors shifted. Not recovery, not yet, but a change. A spark of hope. The doctors paused. Their faces drained of color. They realized, with crushing weight, that the boy had seen what they had missed. His observation, dismissed as childish, was the truth. But instead of celebration, fury erupted. Some accused the nurse of recklessness. Others muttered about luck and chance. Anything but admitting that the voice they had silenced was the one that held the answer. Pride refused to bow, even in the face of death. The boy stood his ground, tears burning his eyes. "You saw it. You all saw it. Why won't you say it?" His voice cracked, but his courage did not. The silence that followed was more violent than shouting. The weight of racism hung thick in the room, not in open slurs or blatant words, but in the refusal to acknowledge, the dismissal of truth, the erasure of brilliance. The janitor, his heart pounding, pulled his son close again. But this time, his voice was different. Stronger. "You were right, son. Don't ever let them tell you otherwise." For the first time, the father refused to bow his head. And in that instant, as the billionaire's life hovered between death and survival, the hospital became more than a place of healing. It became a battlefield, where prejudice and pride stood against truth and courage. The doctors had a choice: accept the truth spoken by a black child, or let arrogance write a man's obituary. The boy had forced them to the edge of their own humanity. The monitors beeped again. The billionaire gasped for breath. Time was running out. The doctors' eyes darted to one another, searching for someone brave enough to admit what they all knew. And the boy's words echoed once more, haunting, undeniable: "You're looking in the wrong place." The question hung in the air, sharp as glass. Would they finally listen, or let prejudice cost a life? The moment stretched longer than seconds. The billionaire's chest rose weakly, the monitors steadied, and the tide of panic began to shift. The doctors, once defiant, now moved with hesitant precision, following the very observation they had mocked. Slowly, the crisis stabilized. The billionaire would live. Not because of wealth. Not because of the 15 experts. But because of a boy no one wanted to hear. Yet in the silence that followed, victory did not feel like triumph. The janitor pulled his son close, holding him with trembling pride. He had spent a lifetime believing that silence was survival. But tonight, his son had broken that silence, and in doing so, revealed a truth far bigger than medicine: that brilliance and worth are not bound by titles, uniforms, or the color of skin. The doctors never thanked him. Some avoided his eyes, others muttered explanations, shifting blame to hide their shame. In the official report, his name never appeared. To the world, the billionaire was saved by expert intervention. The boy's role was erased, as if it had never happened. But the boy remembered. His father remembered. And in their hearts burned both pride and pain. Pride that truth had spoken louder than prejudice. Pain that even in the face of undeniable proof, recognition was denied. This was the weight of racism, not always in open violence, but in quiet erasure, in stolen credit, in the refusal to acknowledge humanity. As the days passed, the story spread in whispers. A nurse told a colleague. A patient's family overheard. The tale of the janitor's son, the child who saw what nobody else could, began to circulate. It grew into a reminder that brilliance cannot be contained, no matter how hard the world tries to ignore it. But for the boy, the night left a scar. He had learned what many before him already knew, that being right was not always enough, that truth could be silenced, and that justice was not guaranteed, even when lives hung in the balance. And yet, within that scar was also a seed. The seed of defiance. The seed of courage. He had faced a room full of doubters and spoken anyway. He had saved a life, even if the world refused to admit it. That seed would grow, shaping him, driving him, reminding him that silence protects nothing, while courage, even small, trembling courage, can change everything. This story is not just about one boy, one father, or one billionaire. It is the story of countless others whose voices are dismissed before they are even heard. The story of doors closed, credit stolen, and brilliance denied. It is the story of a world where prejudice blinds even the most educated eyes. And it forces us to ask, how many more times will truth be ignored because of who speaks it? How many lives will hang in the balance before we learn to see beyond color, beyond class, beyond prejudice? Because this wasn't just a medical failure, it was a human one. A failure to listen. A failure to see. A failure to value every life equally. The boy walked out of that hospital changed. He carried with him the knowledge that even the smallest voice can hold power. And he carried the burden of knowing that the fight against injustice would not end there. As viewers, we are left with a choice. To dismiss this as just another story, or to see it as a mirror. A reflection of the quiet ways racism steals recognition, silences truth, and denies humanity. The question lingers, sharp and unrelenting. How many more truths must be ignored? How many more lives must be risked, before the world finally learns to listen?